I'm very pleased with the show. The Gisela and John and the people at the Mira Godard Gallery do a wonderful job hanging shows, and have from the very beginning. Though John and Gisela went there then. The first Milne show with Mira Godard was when she was in Montreal only, hadn't come to Toronto yet, was in 1971. So this is the 50th year, the 50th anniversary of Milne shows at the Mira Godard Gallery. It was at the Godard Lafore Gallery and Marlborough Godard Gallery, and now the Mira Godard Gallery, and Mira through all that was always the owner and always present. And now Gisela has taken over. Gisela has been here for many, many years, and I'm thrilled to have the show here, and that they've done such a good job, and that we're celebrating 50 years in such a splendid way. Hello, my name is David Milne, not the artist, a son of the artist, and we're going to walk through the Milne in New York and Toronto show at the Mira Godard Gallery, because with the COVID lockdown, you can't walk through. I'm going to start with the earliest picture in the exhibition, which is called Riverfront. It was painted in New York City in about 1907, maybe, and it's one of the first canvases my father did when he was starting to take himself fairly serious as an artist. He'd already finished art school and was working in New York, supporting himself. And I find this, it's a lovely, calm picture. It has some of the things that were key to Milne throughout his career: reflections, water. And we're going to move through New York and then end up in Toronto. Interesting thing, the two major urban centers that my father lived in New York for many years, from 1903 to 1916, and a shorter period in Toronto, much later. He was very interested in water in both places. He painted a lot, as you'll see from this exhibition, waterfront pictures. So we'll move on to the next one, which is called Boathouse in Winter. And I'm not too sure it's the correct title, because it's more of a pavilion than a boathouse. But it's a wonderful, he's still under the influence of Impressionism. He's moved from that first picture, which was influenced, if by anybody, then I think it's most likely influenced by, I get my notes and refresh myself, by Whistler. And Whistler was a great hero of my father's, as were some of the Impressionists, particularly Monet. And we'll talk about Monet in a minute. But this is, I think, a wonderfully successful picture of the riverfront, the scrubbed on shrubs in the foreground, the cool, I think ice, probably snow and ice on the river, then open water in the river behind, and then the cliffs on the far shore. It's a very harmonious, it holds together, punctuated by the three tall trees, and focused with this colorful boathouse or pavilion. We moved from that to another Impressionist picture. It has something that Milne used a lot. I mentioned it with the first painting, but the reflections here are a focus. And Milne used reflections throughout his life. We're going to see some even in I think the Toronto things. This picture holds together very well, I think. Its interest is in the treatment in the water. The rather blurred building behind trees is an interesting solid object, but you're brought down into all the interest, which I can see very clearly when I'm close to it now, and you may not be able to see it on the video. I'd like to go on to a picture which has always been a favorite of mine. It's difficult to date. It's the previous pictures were 1907, 1910 maybe, and now we're moving forward. This could be as late as 1912, but it's difficult to say. It's classic Milne, the lovely foreground, the river with a few dots of boats in it. It seems more Mediterranean to me than it does New York City for some reason. Maybe it's the sailboat. Maybe it's the buildings on top of the green-blue shore in the far distance, and it's the scope of the view that gives it that feeling, a great feeling of calm, the expanse of the river. So that is a favorite of mine. I'm going to move on to what I think is one of the best paintings in the show. And I want to take a moment and read a quote from one of Canada's finest art historians, John O'Brien. He did a Milne show for the Edmonton Art Gallery, which then traveled to New York in 1981. And in his catalog, he wrote about this picture. And I'm going to quote that because John can say this so much better than I can. He says, one of the best of the May 1911 watercolors is Blonde Rocks. Against several upright tree trunks, Milne has placed some fallen trees that together form a loose, almost abstract grid. To accentuate the abstract qualities of the grid, he has varied the pattern of brushstrokes from one section to the next. In addition, he has maintained an intensity of hue within each shape. Each separate color has been kept relatively constant, and with the result that the difference between light and dark values between the fallen trunk and the foreground and the elliptical space above it has been emphasized, and the integrity of the shapes, as opposed to what they depict, has been strengthened. And he concludes, Milne has followed Cézanne in disassociating the individual brushstrokes from the objects depicted. He has also, like Cézanne, emphasized the spaces between his strokes to enliven the surface pattern and to give the painting vigor. And it is a very complete, the surface complex painting, but a wonderfully successful painting, one of the more successful of all his early New York works. We move to two pictures painted on the same day, which I think is April 23rd, 1911, and they're a scene that would be very familiar to sailors and boaters of all sorts, getting the boat ready for the new season. And it's an exciting time. It's a time of hard work, but the hard work is exciting. And it was an exciting time for the artists as well, I think, and hard work to produce these things. Again, we're on the waterfront looking across the water at the far shore. Different views, a more immediate, closer view in Bronx River, and if I've got the name, no, this is Bronx River, and this is called, I can never remember the names, Boat Yard. Who would have guessed? Boat Yard. We'll move around the corner of the exhibition now to one of the stars, if not the star, of the exhibition. I'll take a moment or two to look at that, and it's called Snow Shadows 2. It's based on a painting called Snow Shadows, Snow Shadows 1. And it's a very important painting. It's Milne's first major canvas, the first picture he submitted and was accepted. And a very important exhibition. In this case, it was the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art exhibition, annual exhibition in Philadelphia. The academies were traditionally very conservative, so for Milne to get in was a real feather in his cap to a certain degree. It's signed with this billboard signature, the first signed Milne canvas with that signature. And the fact that he was able to pull this off as a painting and then have it exhibited in the Academy show, I think gave him a confidence that immediately blossomed. It confirmed, it's now 1911, it confirmed, it was shown in February of 1912, the Pennsylvania Academy show. I think it confirmed his confidence in himself that he could be a full-time artist, and that would be his living and his career. And it also gave him the confidence to paint big, strong subjects. Within months, he had painted three works that were more than that, but I could mention three. Gray billboards, a picture called Fifth Avenue Easter Sunday, and the great National Gallery billboards picture. And two of those we think were in the Armory Show, the big Armory Show of 1913, of which Milne had 5 pictures. And the other thing that happened within a few months of this is he got married. So he had a lot of confidence in his future, because he and Patsy had been dating for 5 years anyways, I think. So the time was right. So this picture, if you're observant, you will realize it's really the same location as the boatyards, a little further back with the big foreground. But you'll read these buildings, which are also in the boatyards picture. Milne painting clearly under the influence of Impressionism still. It's called Blue Palisades for quite obvious reasons. It's a painting where Milne has achieved the unity that he admired so much in Monet with great success. There's a small tug to the left, probably pulling a barge further down, heading down river on the Hudson. We're looking across at the New Jersey shore. The tones are very close, but there's lovely dappled blue spots in the water here, and then the foliage on the Palisades with the gray rock behind, row of trees, and then finding the sky above. It's a very satisfying picture. You feel quite complete with that picture, and I've always admired it and liked it. And I'm going to move then to another picture, which is more difficult. Not better, not worse, more difficult. It's called Lavender Shore, and it's a picture that Milne doesn't make many apologies for. It's not easy for some people to grasp. But as Ian Tom commented in his catalog of the exhibition, he said that Milne's, in this picture, Milne was confident that viewers will follow his cues and see the work in its vibrant richness. It's a very nice, Ian has a good turn with words, and I think that's quite right. An uncomfortable picture somewhat, but pure Milne. And for a 1911 picture, it's could be a little later, but it's probably not much later. It's really forward-looking for Milne, and one of the most interesting things in the exhibition, no question. The subject of this delightful small watercolor is Grant's tomb. The title of the picture is Green Shore. It's painted probably in 1912. We're looking across from the New Jersey shore towards Manhattan at 122nd Street. Grant's tomb is close to Columbia University, which the buildings are probably off to the right. A very simple picture. I like it a lot. It's very Milne, lovely big foreground of interest, and that little pop of rusty orange color off to the side, which is, I think, the end of a barge or something going upriver. Just gives enough pop to make the whole thing address. It's quite a delightful picture. And as I say, I like it a lot. Another picture that I'm going to talk about now is one of the last New York pictures. It's called Bronx Skyline. In 1915, my father, I don't think he lived in the Bronx, but I don't know. It would seem almost he had to, because he painted, not quite exclusively, but he painted a lot of paintings in the Bronx. This was done in September of 1915. And some of them are very strong. Most of them are very strong. It's a very strong period it would be comparable with very different subject matter to Milne's Tomogamy period in 1929 almost, with bold shapes and bold colors, color being reduced drastically from some of the brighter New York things. Some major works came out of this year, and the strength of this picture is just, I mean, there's no question about that. I was going to just mention a quote from Ian Tom about it, because he describes it very well. He says that there's a masterful balance of linear pattern and strong blocks of color, and he's right. It is a good balance of all of that thing. Interestingly, at the bottom, you will see some color trials, not untypical with my father. He would be working his colors out, and he would make little splotches of color along the bottom. In this case, intrudes a little bit into the subject of the picture, but not in any distracting way. Picture, drawing really, is intense black trees. It's one of a series of 32 drawings that Milne made, mostly at ink on a thin Japan paper, tissue paper. 7 of them were printed in a lithographic process that we're not quite sure how that worked right now. Milne later commented he didn't know why he was printing them, because there wasn't much market for his originals, so why would there be markets for some copies of them? I like this picture very much. My father commented many years later that the blackness used throughout these drawings and in some of the Bronx pictures was an indication of his mood at the time during this last year, or perhaps his mental state in the last years of his time in New York. He arrived in New York as a young man in 1903, and it's now towards the end of 1915, and living in New York is not easy if you're not making much money, and he was having critical success and a few sales, but not much. So he really felt he needed the freedom of the countryside. And in spring of 1916, he left New York, went about 100 miles north to a little community of Boston Corners, near the Berkshire, the Taconic Hills of the Berkshire Mountains, and had a very happy painting life there for a few years. So this will take us, this and the Bronx picture will take us out of New York, and we'll go to Toronto. I'm standing with the 1939 Milne watercolor called Two Geese, and indeed there are 2 geese in the painting. They are here, these fat little guys in the middle. There are 5 birds in the painting, 2 tall birds and a smaller bird, which could be a gull because it's black and white markings on it. The 2 tall birds, Ian did a lot of research and decided they were cassowaries. And he did, scholar that he is, follow up, and he contacted the curators at the High Park Museum in High Park in Toronto. And long after the catalog went to press, they replied that in fact they are gray-crowned cranes. Say that fast 10 times. So that is the accurate, Ian wanted this corrected, and so we can't do it in the catalog, but at least we can do it on video and say that in this painting are 2 geese, 2 gray-crowned cranes, and 1 gull. I want to explain a little bit about how my father ended up in Toronto. The year is 1939. In those years, he's lived in rural New York, in the Adirondacks, in rural Ontario, first of all in Palgrave, north of Toronto, and then on 6 Mile Lake, just north of the Severn River near Georgian Bay, in a little tar paper cabin where he moved, or he built, after his marriage to Patsy ended in 1933. in the summer of 1938, my mother was camping on the Severn River with two friends, and she went for a long paddle one day through 6 Mile Lake. Storm came up and blew her into my father's little cove where his cabin was, and he rescued her. And 3 years later, I arrived. So I mean that's how my father moved to Toronto, because my mother was a nurse in Toronto, and in 1939 they decided that they would live together in Toronto, and my father closed up the 6 Mile Lake cabin, which is preserved now, not at 6 Mile Lake, but in a little pioneer village, and he started to paint Toronto subjects. And this is the first urban center he'd come to since leaving New York. Interestingly enough, a lot of his pictures in Toronto dealt with camping, believe it or not. And this lovely painting, which was done in the Don Valley, I wish I knew this site. It's probably under the Don Valley Parkway right now, but it's my father wrote about this picture, and I would like to read what my father and mother wrote about the picture, and I would like to read. It's brief. What he said. My mother wrote in a diary, today. The diary is 1st of April 1939. Today, sunny and mild. Up at 7 a.m. and out for a picnic at 9:15. Up the Don River to our old camping place. Finely painted. The log, me, fire, and surroundings. Little bushes, very nice, done in black strokes on the wet background, which makes them look fuzzy. My father, in his diary then, described it. He said, I finally got settled to paint. Wib, which is my mother's nickname. Her name was Kathleen, but she was always called Wib by her family and by my father and by close friends. Wib in brown windbreaker and slacks, an intense blue sweater on one side with some raspberry canes. Wib reading and looking at the fire. The nearly dead fire and smoke in the lower corner. Brush and trees above. Not bad, at least the figure. Very free and far from literal. Contrasts of warm and cold colors and thick and thin lines with emphatic areas of black and deep blue. When my father says if any picture is not bad, it's huge praise from himself on a picture. He was not often very complimentary about his picture, but it's a lovely picture of my mother at a pose where she had obviously the figure's going to have to pose, and they're a reader. They'll have a book in their hand so they can read while the artist is painting, and that's what's happened here. We'll move on to another Toronto painting called Red Lighthouse, and it's probably on the eastern gap of Toronto Harbour. Milne liked Toronto's waterfront, and he came, even when he wasn't living in Toronto, he would come to Toronto. His dealer was in Toronto, his art supply store was in Toronto, some friends were in Toronto. There are 6 versions of this subject, and this is the cleanest and most serene of all the flying gull pictures. Some of them get a bit frantic later on, but this is the first, and it's much calmer and quite lovely. Smoke and Sticks. Unquestionably one of the best paintings in this exhibition. It's in a letter to Kay and Carson Mark, my father commented that the picture was painted in a sleet storm. You wouldn't guess it from this. There is a very detailed quote used by Ian Tom in the catalog. I won't read it, but I urge you, if you're interested, to read that quote. It describes the picture and Milne's painting process really well. I should, so I won't talk a lot about it. I just think it's such a fine painting. in every way. But I mentioned Carson and K. Mark, and I should just a little sidelight on some of Milne's friends. Carson Mark was a graduate student in mathematics at the University of Toronto at the time. And in 1939, 1938 and 1939, he was camping with his wife Kay and with my mother on the Severn River, and my mother introduced after the cars, Carson and Kay Mark to my father. My father and Carson got along wonderfully well. They, Carson, the mathematician, and my father, the painter, they sat and read T.S. Eliot by a campfire and enjoyed their company and discussion immensely. Carson, a few years later, as a follow-up to that, ended up, after he graduated from U of T with his PhD, I think he went back home to Winnipeg and taught there for a few years. And then he went to Los Alamos and was one of the key figures in the development of the atomic bomb and future hydrogen bombs. So, and he's a Canadian that people don't know about very much, but he played a big role. He was also a strong campaigner for just to put the final note on it, for disarmament and ending of nuclear weapons and so on in later years. The title of this painting is Stars Over Bay Street, and the series is called Stars Over Bay Street, and he painted this subject. Milne painted this subject a number of times, both in watercolor and on canvas, and did a series of dry point etchings as well. It was perhaps Milne's most important Toronto subject. It's the location is looking south down Bay Street from the corner of College. The store on the left is Eaton's College Street, which extended from Yonge right across to Bay Street. And unhappily, this end of Eaton's College Street building has disappeared now. The Yonge Street at College end is still there, though it's not Eaton's anymore, of course. And it's looking down at the higher buildings. The first one is probably the Ford Hotel, which is at Dundas Street, and then looking further down to the business section of Toronto. It's the two versions. This is by far the larger and more dramatic. The second version in the National Gallery of Canada is also a wonderful painting, but maybe a little bit different reasons. We'll look at the watercolor in a moment, but this is perhaps one of the best transitions or translations, I guess, of Milne's watercolor technique onto canvas. In the later years, Milne's watercolor technique, as you have seen and will see more with a few pictures left to show you, uses a lot of washes, and it's very fast and it's very immediate. You get into it very quickly, and you do the same thing here. And this sort of swiping across of the black sky is very similar to what he's done in watercolor. And we're going to swing around and look at a watercolor of the same subject called Traffic at Night, but it's part of the Stars Over Bay Street, no stars, but subject with Eaton's College Street and look down here. This wash, where the date of this picture is 1941, and Milne, when he moved to Uxbridge, really grew into this wash, this technique, and developed it more and more, and very successfully, but never with on canvas. And he had trouble going back and forth between the two. So over the years, over the last years of his life, he painted fewer and fewer canvases because he found everything he needed in the watercolors. It's fun to compare the canvas with the watercolor. And finally, a small version of the very same subject, quite different, still Eaton's College Street, a little oogly googly here with the lack of detail, but there's a wonderful focus on the color and the unity with this just slight gray wash here in the sky with a little darker in the streets and the sidewalk. The three pictures are a major and important statement of Milne's, and sort of from an importance standpoint, I think they kind of match the Harlem, the Snow Shadows 2, the early New York one, and the sort of the two strong anchors to this exhibition, I guess, are the canvas Stars Over Bay Street and the New York anchor. And we'll move to another subject that my father, I've alluded to, liked very much about Toronto, and that's Toronto's waterfront. And we've already looked at Red Lighthouse. Another subject that he was successful at, in his mind, anyway, and I like it, though it's not as appealing to some people, I don't think. But it's called White Clouds in a Blue Sky. He painted a number of versions, canceled them all except this one, which is he was finally happy with and quite pleased with. And I will quote again the last little quote I will use. His comment about the White Clouds in a Blue Sky. He's writing to his friend James Clark in New York. Clark was his greatest friend. Clark was a commercial artist and a weekend painter, and became very successful in the commercial world in New York. They were both young men when they met. Eventually Clark became president of a large New York advertising agency. And he and my father remained best friends for their lives, and they exchanged a lot of letters. The Clark letters are now in the National Library in Ottawa, and they're wonderful, wonderful letters. Clark saved them all and made sure they were preserved in the archive. Milne is writing to Clark about this picture. A very bold and simple drawing of waterfront with coal dumps, steamboats, and a gas tank, done in thin line and splashes of black or color. It was too evident alone, so I put in a sky of clouds drawn on white with thin lines with big splashes of blue between. This seemed to slow up the grasp of the picture. The attention wandered into the aggressive sky on the way through the picture. I had a sneaking fondness for it because of the composition. And Milne wrote extensively about the picture, and he was very interested in the eye circulating through this picture, going through this detail, which ultimately is not interesting other than as a pattern across, and then going down into the shapes and colors of the foreground. A very solid, really one of the top Milne pictures. I want to finish with the last picture in the show. We started with Riverfront, and we end with Toronto Harbour. This picture was sketched in 1951. My father had a very serious operation in Toronto in 1951. In fact, he was recuperating. He walked the streets of mostly the waterfront and sketched. The picture was painted in February of 1952 in a log cabin on Baptiste Lake, where my father did all his painting for the last 4+ years of his painting life. The cabin still stands. I own the property and the property beside it where I live, but the cabin remains much as it was when my father was there. It's modest, and it's always amazed me that pictures of great sophistication and ease came out of that log cabin. This is one of them, certainly. I want to just finish by, we've gone through, looked at a number of different mediums. My father always was pushing up and up. He was challenging himself, and that's so that his paintings did not stay in the same place. They kept moving forward. And this is the ultimate point that he got. There's great feeling and spontaneity. It's almost as if Milne transferred his thoughts onto the paper without even using a brush. In fact, he once said he wanted to just wish the paint onto the paper and not have to have any mechanical interference whatsoever. And this painting certainly gives that feeling to it. There's a wonderful quietness to the picture, but there's a vibrancy in the color as well. I think it's a really fine example of Milne's late work, successful and I think sort of fitting in a way that one of my father's last pictures, or pictures in the last year of his painting time, should be of Toronto, and painted on the shores of Batiste Lake in a log cabin, which he loved, the location looking west over the lake and under the hills. It's a fitting kind of finale to his life, if you will. So I think we'll end the show right there. Thank you very much for watching.